Good afternoon, welcome. Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue. My name is Mohammed Lashmi. I'm the President, Vice Chancellor of Toronto Metropolitan University. Before we get started, I would like to open today's event by acknowledging the land we are on. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans and all newcomers, have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I would like to begin by thanking Minister Julie and her European counterparts today for taking the time to be with us this afternoon on our campus. I'm delighted to be able to welcome all of you to our campus for our very first in-person democracy forum since the beginning of the pandemic. While I'm grateful that we are able to safely come together today, I know this is not reality in other parts of the world. The horrors of the war in Ukraine have been felt across the globe. Here at TMU, our thoughts have turned to all our community members who have been impacted by these events, including our many students, faculty, staff, and friends who have personal connections to Ukraine and to the wider region. I'm very pleased that today's event will make space for important discussions about diplomatic efforts to achieve an end to the war and the return of peace, security, and democracy. Ultimately, it is the role of universities to foster deeper understanding of important issues and to bring people together to learn from each other through dialogue. And there is no better place than our great city of Toronto. I believe that today's event accomplishes that. On behalf of the TMU community, I thank you all for your strong and accountable leadership. It's needed now more than ever. I look forward to listening in today's discussion, and thank you again for taking the time to be with us. I will now hand things off to my colleague and friend, Martin Cohen, to get the conversation started. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks. Thanks, Dr. Lashmi. Merci et bienvenue. Welcome, everyone, to our 22nd Democracy Forum at TMU. But as Dr. Lashmi said, it's our first ever hybrid event. And it's an experiment with a hybrid format, so thank you for coming in person. It's good to be back here after 2 years of Zoom, but also a warm welcome to anyone watching online, on TV with the CPAC channel or on the star.com. A warm welcome to you. So let me tell you about our special guests who will talk to us today about their firsthand experiences in helping to defend democracy against the rise of autocracy, militarism on the front lines of Europe and around the world. First, a programming note, one of a few, in fact, today. The Foreign Minister of Estonia, Eva-Maria Liimets, can no longer join us today because she is no longer the Foreign Minister. Her party was dismissed. Don't worry, this is normal. Her party was dismissed from the governing coalition of Estonia last night, and she is heading home as we speak. That's democracy, and the show must go on. Now, beside me is the Honorable Mélanie Joly, who is Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs. She's been our country's point person on Ukraine since the last federal election. Her previous assignments were in economic development, tourism, Canadian heritage, and official languages. Hence my special attention to pronunciation today, but I forgot to check before we came on stage. I will tell you, she is the MP or députée from Ahuntsic-Cartierville.
Great.
Depuis,
Yeah,
depuis,
exactly.
depuis 2015, 2015.
Great Mohawk and great French.
She earned her law degree at l'Université de Montréal and her master's in law at Oxford University. Merci d'avoir accepté notre invitation et bienvenue at Toronto Metropolitan University.
Merci. Thank you.
Beside her is Gabrielis Landsbergis. He has been Lithuania's Minister of Foreign Affairs since 2020 and in its parliament since 2016 after first serving in the European Parliament. His early career was in the Foreign Ministry after getting a master's in international relations and diplomacy and a BA in history from Vilnius University. His grandfather led the cause of independence from the former Soviet Union in 1990. Welcome to Toronto. Second programming note, Latvia's Minister of Foreign Affairs had to bow out at the last minute for family reasons. We're honored to be joined today by the ministry's longtime parliamentary secretary, Zanda Kalnina Lukasevica, a role that she's held since 2014. She's also served in Latvia's parliament as chair of the European Affairs Committee and worked in the office of the president. She holds a PhD and master's in management science from the University of Latvia. Thank you for joining us. One more programming note. You will see a Foreign Service officer tap Madame Joly on the shoulder in a few minutes, or look her in the eye and catch her attention. She will have to leave us for 2 minutes or so to vote in a virtual parliamentary vote. That's democracy, and as I said, the show must go on, right? So you have to come back, though, all right?
Yeah, I'll come back. I'll make sure that to register my vote in the House of Commons.
And from my recollection of the parliamentary configuration, there was no chance of a coalition accident happening today.
My goal is to stay foreign minister for a long time.
Okay, I'm going to kick off the questions, and then, well, we've made news today. I'm going to kick off the questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor a little later. I always remind our audiences that this is not a news conference. I'm not here to beat them up. This is a democracy forum where we try to dig a little deeper, but we also hope that the people on stage, the politicians, will go a little more in depth in their answers. We have people on stage who are trained to be diplomatic, but we're hoping, given the gravity of the situation, they will be more candid than usual. No pressure. On a happier note, just briefly, I can't not acknowledge that this is the day after voting day in Ontario, and not everyone is celebrating the results, but no one is contesting the results, and that's a victory in itself these days. Okay, so these are gloomy days for democratic Ukraine and much of the world. We'll start by setting the table. We'll talk about how we got here, where we're at now, and what the outlook is for Ukraine and Europe and the world, Canada as well. We'll zoom out to some of the other superpowers and ask what it all means for democracy. And my first question to Madame Joly and then to everyone is, we could see this coming. Let's just set the table, as I said. Why didn't we move faster to prepare for it? We in Canada were reluctant to send lethal weapons, which now sounds quaint in the middle of a war. There may have been good reasons for it, so let's hear the answers, and then let's ask ourselves whether that made sense in retrospect. Were we afraid of provoking the Russians? And in retrospect, was that a miscalculation? I'm going to join you.
Thank you. Well, I think that Canada has had a principled approach when it comes to Ukraine since 2014. So, contrary to many countries, following the invasion by Russia of Crimea, already in 2014, we had strong sanctions against oligarchs and against the regime. So we had 400 sanctions in place by the time already the invasion started on February 24th. And also, we had already expelled diplomats from Canada, and therefore diplomats also, in Canadian diplomats in Russia had been expelled. So now, fast forward in 2022, well, very quickly, when I became foreign minister The first meeting we had was at NATO, actually in Latvia, in Riga. And eventually afterwards, the day after, we went to Sweden at the OSCE. And clearly that was the first diplomatic confrontation between Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and Blinken, the American Secretary of State. And we saw that not only there was no understanding clearly, but the narratives that the Russians were trying to push had started. Meanwhile, within the West, we had to make sure that we had the same understanding of what was going on. And there was a gap. There was an intelligence gap between Europe and between the Five Eyes in the US. And I would say even within Europe, the Baltic states were much more clear-eyed than some other European partners. So our goal as the country that bridges a lot, the American reality and European reality, was to make sure that we could bridge that gap. And what happened also is it was very positive for the Americans to go ahead with this declassification of intelligence strategy, because it helped everybody to be on board, not only in Europe, but also within our democracies. And so I would say that we were at the forefront of being very much engaged and have had since the beginning, before the war and since the beginning of the war, one of the strongest response.
But if we were at the forefront, looking backwards now, were we too slow?
No, I don't think so. Our goal was really to make sure that some of the European states were saying we can't be provocative, others were saying no, but we have to be clear-eyed. And we were one of the first to go to Ukraine. I was in Ukraine even before Blinken, having conversations with Ukrainians. When I met with Zelensky in January, he was not talking to me about neither sanctions nor weapons. He was asking me to, and the government, to support financially his government, because he was much more concerned with economic instability than actually the war. And meanwhile, we were training Ukrainian soldiers. We had Operation New Fire on site. We had, in Ukraine, we had trained 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and we were increasing also our investments in training. So, no, I don't think so. Hindsight is 2020. But I think we could have been, we were very strong in saying Russia is lying, and particularly Russia lied. But I think that this was a reckoning, particularly for Europe. And of course, my colleagues could comment on
Mr.
that.
Landsbergis, Madame Joly makes the point that Ukraine was conflicted. They were ambivalent in January and saying, well, don't destabilize, don't scare people too much. From where you sit in the Baltics, did everyone miss the signals that there was intelligence? Yes, but were people afraid of calling Russia's bluff? When you look at what happened now, was there a missed opportunity to prepare?
Well, first of all, I would say that there were several countries that were, as Madame Joly mentioned, already in Ukraine, assisting Ukraine. I will just speak for Lithuania. So the first donation of weapons from Lithuania to Ukraine left in December last year. There were not so many who were sending weapons. I think that there have been several miscalculations on many countries' part. We knew, the Five Eyes knew, the Baltics were convinced that the war will happen. But the main question was, how long can Ukrainians resist? The will to fight is very difficult to measure, and especially to predict, and even, you can have all the intelligence in the world, but you don't know that basically you would have 500,000 people who will take whatever arms they have and continue in fighting, even though the odds are against them. And when others started seeing that this is actually what is happening on the field, then countries started sending more and more weapons. So first of all, we had to build the trust with that Ukrainians are able to fight. Now, And I think that two things got Ukraine to where they are currently during the last 3 months. So first of all, it's will, and then weapons. Now the question remaining, probably one of the most important questions currently, is are we able to push even further? Because they definitely have the will, they showed the capacity, they're quick learners, they're super creative in how they use the weaponry that is being delivered to them. And it has to be mentioned. I know it's uncomfortable to say this, especially in some of the bigger industrial powers, for the industrial powers, that that the victory still depends on how many weapons and which kind of weapons will be sent. If we were to stop now, yes, the Ukrainians would have a very hard time to recovering territories that are under occupation currently. If we would step up with the deliveries, then they have a chance of winning and pushing Russians back.
Tell us, we talked about my pronunciation, Madame Kalnina Lukasevica.
It would be easier to go with Zanda.
Yeah,
Good. We arranged this ahead of time so that it would be, she would get me off the hook. Zanda, if I may. Tell me about, people, as Mr. Lensberger said, thought this war might be over in 3 to 4 days. And it's so hard to predict. We saw in Afghanistan, everybody had it backwards. What's the next, it's now been 3.5 months almost. What is the outlook? How long can Ukraine sustain this if, in fact, there are more supplies and support from the West, as we've discussed here? Does Ukraine have the reserve? It has the will, but it's up against a Russian bear that has enormous reserves, and enormous manpower, enormous resources, enormous artillery, all of those elements. So what's the outlook going forward, do you think?
I think, first of all, we have to remember that the war didn't start on the February 24. It started on 2014. And that time, we had some sanctions. One could say that quite a large amount of the sanctions against Russia, but still, in comparison with today, the reaction was not as decisive. And if the international community would have been much stronger back in 2014, it would save thousands of lives today. But after 2014, we of course supported Ukraine by different means. So supporting implementing reforms, improving the governance of the country, and also training the army. So the Ukrainian army in 2022 is not anymore the Ukrainian army that was in 2014. Yeah, for sure. So it's actually not possible to compare. And that was achieved with support of NATO countries, with the training, Canadian training, and others. So also Latvia participated. So they were ready to fight. Okay. They were equipped. And now what is coming on top of that is incredible will of Ukrainian people. So they will not stop fighting for their country. So it means that the outlook forward is that Ukrainians, they will indeed continue to fight for their country, for their independence, for their sovereignty. And yes, Russia and Putin thought that he will win the war in 3 days. So the Russian soldiers didn't have any food in their bags. They had parade uniforms, already seeing them marching in Kiev. That will not happen. But we need to help Ukrainians really to win this war and to defeat Putin and Russia. And so it means we need to supply more weapons.
Let's talk for a moment about the Baltics. And Canada has about 700 troops in...
1,300.
It's now 1,300, thank you. Leading the NATO battle group in Latvia. It was created 6 years ago to deter a Russian attack, a kind of a tripwire, but now the place is a powder keg, the whole region. So what more do you in the Baltics need? We're talking about Ukraine, let's talk about the Baltics for a moment and the Russian byplay, because you're neighbors. What more can Canada do? And then we'll ask Madame Joly to answer. Mr. Lensberger.
Well, we've established throughout the 3 days visit that Canada is doing everything that it can to assist Baltics, and we're truly appreciative.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Yes. So even though the question, appears, but I mean, there are limits to what each and every ally can do. So I would divide, that there are 3 steps. So first of all, it's what we can do as to ensure our own security. So all 3 Baltic countries announced that we're increasing our defense spending from 2.
I think you're off the hook from
Yeah, I just
replying
need
to
to vote just a
his
second.
request.
Go ahead.
There you are.
Okay, so now I can
Now
talk.
you can tell us what you really need.
So, like what really is happening. So we've increased our defense spending to 2.5%. That's quite a big commitment to the Baltic countries. We are considering even going further than that next year, but it has to, additional questions need to be answered of how to achieve it. So,
But tell us while she's not here what more you need Canada to do, not what you're doing.
We have 3. We have three countries that are taking care of leading nations in each of the country. In our case, it's Germany. Latvia is Canada, and UK is in Estonia. And I think that all of our 3 leading nations, they increased their capacity, their deployments in the 3 Baltic states. But we have to understand also what is happening on the other side of the border. Lithuania has 700 kilometers of border with Belarus, and Belarus is an active warring part against Ukraine. It allowed thousands and thousands of Russian troops in its territory. Kiev was shelled from Belarus. The closest military base where Russian troops were stationed, they're no longer there, was 5 kilometers away from the Lithuanian border. So for us, the situation changed dramatically. Mm-hmm. Even though Belarus was not a neutral country, it was an ally to Russia, but it was never an ally who would allow so many, such a military force on a NATO border. So the future conflict, if it were to happen in the future, hopefully not, but if it would come from Belarusian territory, most likely. So we would like that to be reflected by our allies. And that's why we're looking now to Madrid summit. There's a huge event in a bit more than 3 weeks in Spain, where the political decisions will have to be made on how NATO should look like in the Eastern Front, in the Eastern flank, sorry. Eastern Front is a different concept. So we're expecting that not necessarily Canada, and I mentioned that at the beginning because Canada has a limited capacity, but there are other allies who could step in and ensure that the situation on the other side of the border is met with an increased presence on our side. Because truly, I mean, and it's not just one or several politicians talking. It's actually this is what people you would hear people saying that in the streets of in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia.
Minister, how did you vote? No, what is your answer?
My answer, I heard a bit. So I think the first and foremost, what we need to send as a clear message right now to Russia is unity within NATO and within the West. So the summit of Madrid is really, really important, and we need to make sure that we have a strong message getting out of that. And that is also why I had the conversation this morning with my new French counterpart, Catherine Cotognat. So that's the first thing. Second thing, indeed, we need to not only have a strong answer towards Ukraine, because yes, China is looking what's going on in Ukraine, but Russia is also looking on what's going on in Ukraine, and the Baltic states are, clearly at the doors of Russia. So I understand their anxiety and their preoccupation. That's why recently we increased our eastern flank presence. When you said we had 700 soldiers, that was in February. We've increased by 450 of them, plus personnel. We are sending a frigate more also in the Baltic Sea. And what I've said also to Zenda and Gabrielus is we now have 3,400 soldiers on standby should NATO need more of our presence. So their security is our security. So that's why we are willing to do our work. There are 3 important, right now, battalions in Lithuania, in Estonia, and in Latvia. In Estonia and in Lithuania, it's the UK and the US are really leading them, and it's only their military. Well, in Latvia, it is us and 12 other nations. So we're leading it, but it's the first real multinational NATO force. And we can be proud of that because I think that, Sandra didn't say that, but at the beginning, Latvia was like, oh, okay, what's that multinational force? Will it really work? Who are these Canadians? And now I would say that in Latvia, and of course she can speak about her country and their response better than I do, but I think there's kind of a pride that this multinational force is really working. And it is because I think, and let's be proud about it, it's because it's a Canadian way of doing things. And I think there's that cohesion that is happening because Canada is leading it.
Let's talk about something else that's quintessentially Canadian, and that is that this war is personal for a lot of people. The conflict, just as it is very personal and up close for you in the Baltics. The largest Ukrainian diaspora outside of Russia is in Canada, and there are diasporas from the Baltic countries as well: Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. My late mother, was born on the border of Ukraine and Poland and lived under Russian and German occupation. So I think all of us feel this. How does that influence, Madame Joly, Canadian foreign policy, that domestic component? We were the first country to recognize Ukraine under a progressive conservative government. Mm-hmm. But how does that dynamic between the domestic diaspora and the fact that all Canadians are seized of this and the way in which we approach this?
It's part of our foreign policy because, of course, we are one of the biggest diverse democracies in the world. 1/3 of Canadians are either born abroad or first-generation Canadian. That's just who we are as a country. I don't need to explain this to this audience, particularly here in Toronto. So, of course, it comes with realities of how we engage in the world. Bearing in mind what are what is the Ukrainian diaspora thinking here, the South Asian diaspora thinking, but also, not everybody has the same opinion. There are diverse voices, and we know that. But at the same time, I think that we've been able to have such a strong stance in many parts of the world because of our understanding and our strong people-to-people ties. So it's not only the government and me heading the foreign policy approach, it's really, there's so many levels of engagement, particularly with Ukraine. And I see that my former colleague Boris is here, who's been a strong advocate for Ukraine, and has been providing me also some information that I don't necessarily get from neither my officials or even talking to the foreign minister or the chief of staff of Zelensky. So I think that's part of the strength we have.
Okay, let's ask just briefly our 2 foreign guests. There's a lot of suggestion that NATO, or some suggestion, that NATO overreached by bringing in so many former Soviet countries into the alliance, the military alliance, and by leaving the door open, even partly a few years ago, to Ukraine. What do you say to people who question whether NATO got itself into this in the first place?
First of all, we don't perceive us as former Soviet countries. So Latvia was established in 1918.
You're being told
so we were an independent country, and we were occupied for 50 years. So after regaining independence, we were finally back where we belong, to Europe and democratic and Western world. So, and that was an obvious choice for us to join the EU and the NATO. I think that also the NATO became stronger with having us there, and we proved that we are contributing to international other missions. So we are now investing a lot in our own security. Latvia has committed that we will increase our defense spendings to 2.5 in the next years. So this year it's 2.2 to 2.3. We'll see what will be the numbers at the end of the year. Of course, we are in, and I couldn't comment the previous question, but let me just underline that in Latvia, it's not only the government, but the society as such really appreciates what Canada is doing for our security. And this multinational battalion, it's of great value for us. And we understand that it's possible only because of this decision of Canada government, the support of the Canadian society. As in democracy, it wouldn't be possible with this support. So really thank you for that. And also the willingness of the soldiers to serve in Latvia. And we met them yesterday, and I was happy to see that they were happy about their service in Latvia and ready to go back. So joining the NATO and also having this situation, we are strengthening the NATO. Also this multinational battalion where 12 nations serve together, they train their ability to cooperate. That's enormous value for the military to have this experience in one base, being together 12 nations, having the drills, having the everyday communication, training the command chains, etc. So that is of huge value for NATO itself.
I want to just zoom out. Before we go to take some questions from the floor, there's one more for me that I want to just zoom out a little bit. What's interesting about the panel today is that we have two representatives from countries that have not just been focused on the Russian superpower or bear next door, but also having some encounters with China, another superpower that Canada has had some difficult encounters with of late. I don't know if anyone here knows that Lithuania in particular has had some serious tangles. They have said they would be opening up a Taiwanese representative office. Most countries like Canada have a Taipei office, referring to the city, the capital of Taiwan. And China has referred to Lithuania as leading the anti-China vanguard in Europe. So we had our own experience where Michael Kovrig, a career diplomat like everyone here on the stage, was held hostage, held for ransom by China for 2 years, as you know. Can I start with you, Mr. Landsbergis? You've been on the firing line, you've been to Washington, and I want to just read what the Americans said, if I have it here, that, your counterpart in the US said that you had ironclad US support for Lithuania in the face of attempted coercion from the People's Republic of China. So you're in the middle of it. You've got Russia on one side, and you're having a bit of a fight with China. How do you do that?
Well, again, it's about a narrative. Lithuania did not pick a fight with China. Lithuania decided to support and to allow Taiwan to open a representative office in Vilnius. And we're proud that we did it. And now the people from Taiwan have an office in one place in the world where they can call the office the way they wanted it, not the way that a big power that's geographically very close to them would tell us how can we call the office. We did not break any taboos apart from the name, so it's still not a diplomatic office. It's a trade representation, but China decided to pick a fight with Lithuania. And they truly wanted to stop the precedent that nobody ever would do anything like Lithuania. And I honestly don't think that they succeeded. We withstood with the help of our allies and friends, and also Canada, who was very supportive. And knowingly, I mean, you know what it is, to be under pressure. And but it also showed that the countries, first of all, they can resist, but they can have their own modus operandi when it comes to foreign policy and dealing with China. So I think that even though it was a pretty small case when it comes to global issues, Lithuania opening a very small office, just 4 or 5 people working in, but it showed that it's possible and is worthwhile because it defends the principle of sovereignty to have independent foreign policy. That's one thing. But also, certain other principles that working with democratic allies, it's worthwhile rather than authoritarian ones. And then again, when you're saying and you're comparing those, Russia and China, I think that many things, and then countries, authoritarian countries, they usually use the same textbook and apply the same things to their neighborhood. What we're seeing to Russia, Russia was saying that Ukraine should never join NATO, should not join EU even, it's a latest trend. And that was the reason why they decided to attack. Again, breaching the sovereignty, now even territorial integrity, and attacking a sovereign country, a sovereign neighbor. But when you think about it, then China's position is the same direction. Economic coercion, because we don't like the steps that you're taking. So you will be pressed and pushed to the point where you back down, because that's the way we work. That's the way the world should operate. And we don't believe that. We still believe that the world should operate on a rules-based environment where we agree or agree to disagree, and we still remain civilized. Because the world that Russia, and in some cases China, proposes is a very dangerous world. It's a world where just power prevails. And countries like Lithuania, and Baltic countries, and actually there is no country too large that would fall victim in the world where the power is the sole definitive actor of how the country should cooperate.
Madame Joly, a few interesting lessons from Lithuania's experience. Different countries, different trade relationships. We have a massive trading relationship with China, slightly different, proportionately. But we have felt the heat that Lithuania has felt in a different context. I know you're going to tell us that you are undertaking a comprehensive review of your Pacific foreign policy, but since you're on stage, tell us how you are approaching this. You're not just the point person on Ukraine, you're the point person on China.
Yeah, for sure. Well, a couple of things. Great to see that the two Michaels are back home. That was extremely important, and it was at the core of our foreign policy approach when it came to dealing with China. Now, I had my first phone call with Wang Li a month and a half ago, Wang Li being the Minister of Foreign Affairs for China. And that was the first time in 3 years that we were having a conversation at the political level. I think that we need to engage diplomatically. At the same time, we need to be able to address tough issues, from economic coercion to the question of human rights and Uyghurs, for example. So what we know is that China is looking at what's going on in Ukraine and taking notes. So more we're united, more we have a strong approach, better we're able to send a message to the world of how we will stand for the rules and principles that have helped keep the stability in our world since the Second World War. So what Gabrielis was talking about. At the same time, we have engaged with Taiwan. We are negotiating a free trade agreement with Taiwan. We have strong people-to-people ties. We talked about it in your previous question. And we are working with them within the WHO on the pandemic. So yes, indeed, I'm working on an Indo-Pacific strategy and looking at what will be our approach in terms of diversifying trade, seeking important infrastructure investments in the region, and also working with our allies. I really think that Canada has not asserted itself as a Pacific nation enough yet. We are very much focused on our transatlantic relationship, which is important, and which is usually where the main part, the majority of people in Canada live. But we have a very important coast, a beautiful British Columbia province, and a lot of things are happening in the region. So we need to play a role to ensure the stability, and we will do so.
Is there a question from the floor? And before, I didn't think you'd raise your hand so fast, but while the microphone comes your way, I do want to ask you a quick follow-up, though.
Yep.
trick question.
Yeah.
Will your Indo-Pacific strategy answer the question that I've been trying to find the answer to for a couple of years now? Why can't Canada be part of the Quad? So the Quad is the alliance between India, Australia, Japan, and the US, and we're not there.
Well, so there's no security architecture for the Indo-Pacific. We know that. There's no NATO for the Indo-Pacific. The Quad is an agreement that was developed years ago and was reactivated recently, which is an important agreement. And at the same time, there is also the AUKUS deal that happened between Australia and the US and the UK. We have
So that was the nuclear submarine deal.
That's it. It was a nuclear submarine.
But can you get us into the Quad? And if not, why not?
I think that's a wrong question. I think the question is what will be the right security architecture for Canada in the region? And so we are working on this. That's the first point. Second point is I think Canada has a very important competitive advantage that we underestimate. We're the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with all other G7 countries. So we have one with Europe, we have one with the UK, we have one, we know, NAFTA, with the US, and we are part of the CPTPP. And even recently, last week, I was talking to my Indian counterpart. He didn't even know that. And so this is something that we have to pursue. There's a lot of investments that are happening. I was in Vietnam a month ago, and they were looking for energy investments, and particularly wind power. And we're referring to I think it's $3 billion project we have in Taiwan for wind. So these are also the conversations they're having, but they're happening because we have this CPTPP approach.
Did you have a conversation with your Indian counterpart on the Quad?
Yes, of course. I have conversations. I sat down with my Japanese counterpart when I was in Germany at the G7. We have a very good relationship with Japan right now because through the G7, usually there's 2 meetings per year. We're at, I think, the 7th or 8th meeting, and we're supposed to have one soon again because we are this organization at this point that is coordinating a lot of the efforts of the West regarding Ukraine. But we're talking indeed about the Indo-Pacific.
Okay, I'm going to stay tuned for that one. Go ahead. Do you want to? There's a question over there first, and then yes. Oh no, right. Yeah, you were first off the mark. There you are. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you very much for gracing us with your presence today. My name is Birutė Luksnaitė. I'm a Lithuanian-Canadian lawyer working in Canada. I'm a tax lawyer and also served this year as the chair of the Ontario Bar Association's tax section. And my question is related to tax. And Madame Joly, you just mentioned free trade agreements. My question relates to the tax angle of that. I know that recently Canada revoked the most favored nations treatment for Russia under the trade tariff. And I was wondering, has Canada considered, along with its allies, potentially looking into revoking the dual tax treaties with Russia? For example, in 1986, the United States revoked its tax treaty with South Africa as part of its anti-apartheid
okay, well,
sanctions.
let's let the minister answer the question.
That is the extent of my question. Thank you.
Well, that's a really good suggestion. Right now, throughout the government, we're looking at what are the different levers we have and what can be done. So indeed, the 35% tariff has been imposed on Russian exports. And I'm very interested in knowing more about your idea, and I'll talk to the Minister of Finance about it for sure.
Okay.
And she's very interested as well.
Quick answer, yes.
Yeah, if I may just add that Latvia took this decision a month ago. We revoked from our side this dual tax agreement with Russia. So indeed, also by showing that we are not willing to continue to have close economic relations and that we are not encouraging trade between Latvian companies and Russian companies. Instead, we are encouraging looking for other markets. And anyway, after the February 24, there is not much trade between Latvia and Russia. So that was done by a parliament decision recently.
Okay.
And I'll have a new sanctions to announce very soon as well.
You can announce them here if you want. There was a question in front. Yes. Go ahead. Oh, there we are.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Marysia Basirkov. I'm a professor here at TMU, and some of my research concerns sexuality and gender in Ukraine. I want to talk about refugees. As we know, over 7 million Ukrainians have had to flee the Russian invasion. A small fraction of them are living in my home, my cousin and her 5 kids in my 1-bedroom house. It's a lot of fun. Actually, it is fun, but it's crowded. And I want to start by really commending the Estonian, Lithuanian, and Latvian governments for your support for Ukrainian refugees, and particularly Latvia offering support to hosts, to offering housing allowances to refugees. All 3 countries are offering housing support, free transport on public transport and rail. So my cousin who arrived here will, because of all her kids, will receive $10,000 one-time support, which will cover maybe 2 months of housing and a bit of food if we're lucky. One of my nephews is 17 years old and faces 3 times the amount of domestic tuition here at TMU, as we await to hear from further support from TMU. So I want to ask Minister Joly, when will you provide more robust support for the vast number of Ukrainian refugees coming to Canada, many of whom are single-parent families who, they get a SIN number, but they're moms with small kids, like my cousin, and they can't easily find work. So it really is a humanitarian crisis that has hit Canada very hard, and we'd love to hear about more robust support.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, indeed, we've said we would be accepting an unlimited number of Ukrainian refugees. And we've done a lot, but we can do more. I agree. We already, there have been 3 charter flights that have arrived from Poland. I was there for the Montreal flight last weekend. And indeed, a lot of the people that are seeking refuge to Canada are women, grandmothers, and also their children or grandchildren. And when I was in Poland at the beginning of the war, these are the types of people that I met at the local train station, and we see them throughout Europe. So, of course, they're given not only a visa, but a work permit. We wanted to make sure that things would go fast, which is usually something that is a challenge when it comes to immigration processes. And at the same time, we wanted to offer them support, but I hear you. I'll talk about it more with my colleague, Minister of Immigration, about this issue. I think that our priority right now also is to process all the demands, because there's more than 100,000 demands that have not been processed yet, and we want to make sure that these Ukrainian refugees come to Canada. We know that it's a drop in the bucket when compared to what Europe is facing, but at the same time, we need to do more. This is what Canada stands for. We are a place that accepts and welcomes, and we always want to do our part in humanitarian crisis, and we will do so. That's our goal for sure.
I don't know if your staff briefed you, but Toronto Met has a very large immigration and resettlement interdisciplinary team of students and faculty. So that's a great question. Can I just quickly ask the group about migration and what's different, perhaps, about Ukraine's immigration is that a lot of people want to go back. If you look at Syria, less so. People tended not to want to go back unless they had to. Ukraine, if everyone leaves, if millions come, 7 million have left, a lot have returned to Kyiv. If a lot of people don't go back, does Putin win if he depopulates Ukraine?
You want to go, Gabriel? Go ahead.
Yeah, I can start. I mean, what we're seeing, what we're seeing now currently is the latest report from the United Nations said that about 2.6 million people already returned. Staggering numbers when you consider that it is a country at war, that people trust.
Very unusual.
Yes, it's incredibly unusual. So that they trust that they will be safe, but also that they are committing to rebuilding the country, which is a very important message. And that's why we are so loudly raising the question of rebuilding, that the Ukraine needs to be rebuilt now, because people this is what they want to hear, that they would be coming back to a country which is not devastated by war, but which is actually better. It could be better than the one that they left, with the assistance, with whatever we can to help them do that. We've seen in 2014 what happens in the territories that are occupied. First of all, they are depopulated. There's nothing there. Is becoming ghost towns and ghost territories. It happened in Georgia, especially in South Ossetia, where now. So you had a piece of country which had, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people probably. Now you would have 40,000 people, and out of those 40,000, 20,000 are Russian troops. Right. So you can imagine. So that means empty cities, empty towns, empty anything. This is the result of Russian world, just leaving a dead place when you take it.
A scorched earth.
A scorched earth, yes. So. So whether Putin himself considers that a victory, I don't know. But for us, it's a very strong symbol of what it means to allow Putin to capture territory, and it counts both for Ukraine or for the Baltic states the same way.
I think one of the issues we need to deal with in order for people to go back is demining. What was striking when the Prime Minister, the Deputy Minister, and myself, Deputy Prime Minister and myself were there, is that we were in Irpin, which is next to Bucha, which is a suburb of Kyiv, which would be not as dense as Scarborough, but a bit like Milton.
GTA geography.
So. Usually lots of young families, first home buyers, lots of strollers, lots of parks, playgrounds. And obviously we saw that the impacts of the missile strikes, and we saw the devastation. But what was really striking was in front of a lot of doors, and the entrance of many condo complexes was written mines in Ukrainians. And everything has been mined, from people's front lawns to parks and playgrounds to even cemeteries. Like, it's really dangerous. So, of course, the civilian population Ukrainians need to be able to go back to their homes. And so we, as a country, have a lot of expertise when it comes to demining. There's the Ottawa Convention on landmines. We were the ones that brought this to the international level, and it was my former colleague Lloyd Axworthy, who was the foreign minister, who really made it a priority at the time, because human security was at the core of the foreign policy. Now, we want to make sure that we do more for demining Ukraine. We want to convey many countries on the question. And of course, when the Prime Minister spoke to Zelensky in Ukraine 2-3 weeks ago, he mentioned that would be a priority. So I know the EU is working on that as well, is very interested. And so this is, for us, a fundamental, how can I say, issue to deal with beforehand.
A long-standing issue. I remember when Lord Axworthy was campaigning for that when I was based in the Middle East, but I also remember parts of Egypt and El Alamein, decades after World War II, people still lose their limbs from mines in Cambodia and so on. I see a question from Boris. Last question we have time for. Go ahead, Boris.
Is a former member of parliament.
A former member of parliament.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister, for that introduction earlier. But yes, as the Minister had noted, we do have a friendship, but notwithstanding that, Minister, as was referenced, many of us feel this quite personally, Ukrainian Canadians. I have family members on the front lines and my wife's family members who are under occupation. So a really deep, heartfelt thank you, Minister, for all of I know how hard you've been working over the last 3 months, and many of those conversations in Europe with our allies have not been easy. Thank you for being steadfast in your positions. And I know that there are difficult conversations that take place in Ottawa as well. So thank you for all of that hard work. Minister, in our conversations going back months, we talked about not only the specter of a genocidal war against the people of Ukraine, but the specter that by the fall, some of the poorest, most food insecure and politically unstable countries in the world will be facing famine. Ukraine is a major supplier of food commodities to the world, and we may see our front pages in our newspapers with not only photos of genocidal atrocities in Ukraine, but of children in Africa, the Middle East, with distended bellies, starving to death. The world's woken up to that in the last few weeks. Canada has an illustrious legacy. It was referenced during the discussion at the UN. Most of and your hard work has been with European allies. It's been very Eurocentric. But these are some of the poorest countries. And we have an opportunity to build on our UN legacy, whether it's the Pearsonian legacy, Axworthy's legacy, or the legacy of responsibility to protect that Canada formulated and brought to the UN. Will we see in the next few weeks, Canada, we have a tremendous asset in Bob Ray, our ambassador there, leading the charge on this particular file with new alliances with some of the most food insecure, poorest countries of the world who are incredibly vulnerable? And will Canada commit to, as Great Britain has indicated, to perhaps, if the ports of Odessa and its infrastructure is designated as protected for the sake of the international global food supply chain, will Canada also commit to provide warships? We've sent them in the past into the Black Sea to be part of an international flotilla that would accompany those cargo ships, those humanitarian food cargo ships, to the port of Odessa. And of course, Romania, Bulgaria would be involved, their navies would be involved, and as well as the air cover that's required for that. So will we be seeing Canadian leadership on this particular file? Thank you.
Boris has laid it all out for you.
Yeah, that's it.
So all you have to do is say yes. This is a serious question about food security and the military aspect of that as well.
Yeah. So I think we've entered the third phase of the conflict. The first one was referred to your first question, the leading up to the invasion. The second one was the invasion and our reaction. And now the third phase, which is, of course, the war is still raging, but what are the consequences internationally of the conflict? And clearly, indeed, there's 49 million people that are facing famine in the coming weeks because millions of cereals, millions of grains are stuck in silos in the port of Odessa and the 3 main Ukrainian ports. This is a situation that is extremely alarming. And so that is what I spoke about with my colleague, my French colleague, this morning, but this is also why we'll be working with the G7 very, very soon on this issue. And indeed, I'm very much aware of the UK proposal. My colleague Liz Truss and I talk a lot about this. Meanwhile, indeed, the UN is looking into the issue. When I was at the UN last week, I spoke with UN Secretary General Guterres about this issue, and Barbara is very much aware because there are some negotiations, but we are very much concerned that we need to make sure that the Russian Federation is held to account should there be a UN solution, and that's a very big preoccupation. At the end of the day, we will be supporting Ukraine at the negotiation table on this very question. And meanwhile, we need to be ready not only to send ships, and particularly also cargo ships, to Ukrainian ports to export the grain and make sure that Middle Eastern countries and African countries can have access to it. But also, we're working with Romania to find solutions because every single ton of grain is important. And so we will get grain out by route, by train, by barges, from the river to Constanta in Romania. That's what we need to do. It's not only important for, obviously, people facing famine. 40% of Ukraine's economy is based on its capacity to export grains. And so if we don't do that, we are even more weakening Ukraine, its ability to provide services to its people, but also to be able to continue the fight, And so that is also why we're in contact with Ukrainians about this very issue. And of course, Gabrielis and I in particular have had many conversations over these 2 days about Odessa, because this is, I would say, in terms of geopolitics, the priority of all countries. And it needs to be clear that this is happening because of Putin's war of choice, not because of the sanctions imposed by the West. And so this is really, really, really important. And of course, I'll be with Blinken next week at the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. And this also will be clearly the #1 issue in our conversations. And I know you're a great baker, by the way. And I know that, it's your love for Ukraine, your love for wheat, Boris. You've talked to me about this issue in January, before everybody was talking to me about this issue.
That's an important distinction about cause and effect and a deliberate policy of food sabotage by Russia. And Boris and I have written about Boris and some of the attacks against Future Bakery, criminal attacks. That is all the time that we have left. There are other questions that I know you all have. I wanted to ask about Barbara at the UN and the future of the UN, the future of your vocation as diplomats, because there's a lot to be asked and described about how the UN and diplomacy functions. There are positives and negatives, but we are out of time. And so I want to thank our distinguished guests for defending democracy and defending themselves today. From me, Mélanie Joly from Canada, merci beaucoup. Miigwech, vous êtes toujours les bienvenus ici à l'université parmi les étudiants et les professeurs pour discuter de la démocratie. We hope to see you again at Toronto Met. Thank you also to Gabrielis Landsbergis from Lithuania, Zanda Kalnina Lukasevica from Latvia. I also had on my endnotes Eva Maria Limets from Estonia, but that's redundant. Stay safe and safe travels. A big thanks to everyone who joined us here today in person or online. And if you voted in yesterday's election in Ontario, thank you for your service. You're doing your duty for democracy. A special thanks quickly to the Faculty of Arts for sponsoring today's event, to the Dean, Pam Sugiman, and the team led by Rhiannon and John for helping to organize this. Stay tuned for future democracy forums at TMU. Thank you.